Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming and welcome to the first HPE Expert Seminar. And since it's National HIV Testing Week coming up, we thought what better time to talk about the new testing technologies that are available. So I'd like to welcome all of you. I'd like to welcome everyone who's watching on the live stream on YouTube. This is a first for HPE, so hopefully you guys will enjoy it and get a lot out of it as well. So yeah, obviously testing week starts on the 19th of November. There's some other resources on the back table. If you haven't seen them before, have a look. If you want to take a couple of samples back to your office. Obviously, everyone can order free resources, and hopefully you've done that already. But if you haven't, there's a brochure there that you can use to you can order those resources. So we've got a really great lineup of experts and practitioners today to give you kind of an overview of what these technologies in terms of how they work in principle, and then also how they work in practice, how they can be applied to new settings. Because I think this is a really big time of change for us. Obviously, there's a huge push on testing globally. We've got the 90-90-90 numbers. Everyone's talking about upscaling testing. But obviously, if we're going to do that, we need to think about how we can use technologies differently, how we can be more creative, how we can reach more people. And I think it's using these kind of technologies and sharing information like this that's really going to push that agenda forward. So thank you very much again. So I'm going to be quiet now and introduce Dr. Michael Brady, who's going to talk about self-testing in the UK.
Thanks. Does that work? It's working. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for the invite and the introduction. So my name is Michael Brady. I'm the Medical Director of the Chest Trust and also an HIV consultant in King's College Hospital in South London. So I'm going to be talking about self-testing in the UK context. So Kerry's already alluded to this, and this will not be new news to you, but we need new technologies and new approaches to testing to deliver the significant upscale in the number of tests and the number of repeat tests to push us further along the way in terms of reducing what remain unacceptably high levels of undiagnosed HIV and late diagnosis, and ongoing static flatlining in terms of incidence of new HIV infections amongst men who have sex with men. We've got lots of really good mathematical modelling data that has kind of demonstrated, I guess what you call the art of the possible, but what could we achieve if we dramatically increased HIV testing? So one study that showed if we were able to triple the number of HIV tests, this is in men who have sex with men, and again this is modelling data, but if we could triple the number of HIV tests in men who have sex with men, we could reduce the incidence by about 50 to 60%, so reduce new transmissions by 50 to 60%, and if we added on to that treatment as prevention, so putting people onto therapy as soon as they're diagnosed, the incidence could drop by as much as 80%. And another modelling study which looks at a broad sort of combination approach to HIV prevention that showed that increasing testing rates plus treatment prevention plus the use of PrEP could halve the number of expected infections in just 5 years. So the impact is very quick and very real. But there are practicalities in terms of delivering that. We know there are multiple barriers to HIV testing, and new technologies and new approaches to testing could address some of those barriers, and I think self-testing definitely gives us the opportunity to do that. And if nothing else, the practicalities of shrinking budgets, sexual health services and traditional testing sites being at capacity. There is no way, I would suggest, in our traditional bricks and mortar setting to deliver that degree of testing. It has to be done in a different way. Self-testing, and particularly self-testing with online social media promotion, health promotion is the way forward. So what I'm going to share with you is some of the UK experience. So I'm going to present some data which our colleagues at BioSure have shared with us. So about their first year's experience of having what is currently the only available self-testing in the UK. I'm also going to talk a little bit about a study called Pantheon, and there's some early results from that from some focus groups. Well, I noticed the author of that paper is in the room, so if I get anything wrong or you want to ask some more detail, Charlie Mitchell's over there. Oh, sorry. What am I doing? From what? My bottle? Shall I hold it? Yeah. You can talk in your pocket. You can talk in your pocket. I'm going to present some newest data. It's a little pilot that we did at Touting as just a partnership with BioSure and to do some sort of future implications. So, this is probably just a refresh, but just to remind ourselves where we're at. The BioSure HIV self-testing kit, which is the kit that I'm going to be talking about in terms of our experience, has been available in the UK since April 2015, so about 18 months now. And that was became available after self-testing was legalised in April 2014. It's a finger prick blood test that requires just 2.5 microlitres of blood, so it's a really small sample of blood. I think that's an important thing to keep into the context when we're thinking about acceptability. So I've certainly been involved in home sampling services where we've had to get people to give a much larger amount of blood, and that's the single barrier often to some of those home sampling services. It's quick, you get results in 15 minutes, and what I'm going to present is their first year's experience from what's called post-marketing surveillance data. So post-marketing surveillance data is what the company has to produce for the regulators to show that it's effective and safe for what it's meant to do. Now this is very out of date now because there's many more places that people can get hold of the self-test, but certainly when I put the slides together, the three main places were the BioSure website itself, through the Freedoms website, and through Amazon, but there's many more online opportunities for people to order them. Independent pharmacies, it's available on Lloyd's online, and they're working on a lot of community organisations to increase access to self-testing. And what goes into the post-marketing surveillance, it's relatively high-level data, but we have data on sort of the number and the timing of orders, the gender of the person ordering the test, and obviously postcode of residence, because the kits are posted out. And in terms of feedback, there's kind of three main ways that they collect feedback. One is sort of ad hoc email and telephone feedback, so there are numbers and email addresses available on the website for people to feedback. There are user surveys intermittently done, and also there's something called the Pebble feedback website, which gives a much more sort of qualitative feedback, so people can go on there and post their comments and their experience about self-testing. So this is the data for the first year, so April 15 to March 16, and in that year, just short of 35,000 units were sold. 15% of people ordered more than one test, and from a survey they did of 32,000 people, 50% of them had never tested before, which I think is an important figure in the sense of maybe reassuring us that by delivering a new model, we get to people who perhaps have not been able to test in our existing traditional model. Just short of three quarters, excuse me, just short of three quarters were men, and the majority were ordering from what defined as non-metropolitan areas. It's a relatively high-level way of doing this, so they've looked at orders coming from larger cities like London, Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, and Liverpool, but the majority were people who are living outside of urban areas, which again starts to show that this is a service that could well be attractive to people who live in rural areas and maybe don't. If you can see me, give me a second. Who don't live in urban areas where there are greater opportunities and perhaps it's easy to get information. In terms of ordering, so this is the number of orders going from May 2015 up to February, and you can see the variation there. I think what this shows really nicely, which is what we've seen in previous home sampling services, is that the knowledge of it and people accessing testing is really acutely aligned both to promotion, particularly through social media sites like Grindr. You can see those peaks where there were Grindr adverts, but also through wider awareness. And I think that really reinforces the importance of integrating these self-testing and self-sampling with existing or new health promotion techniques and messages. So there's a big peak around World AIDS Day, and then a big peak, the biggest peak in fact, when Charlie Sheen came out about his HIV status. So it gives us an opportunity to match awareness, either through advertising or through the general media, with an offer of a test. In terms of performance of the self-test, it's difficult to get a very robust measure of how well the tests are performing in the setting where people are ordering a test, the test going out, and then we don't know what their result was. So kit performance is very difficult to accurately measure because it relies on self-reporting. It relies on people coming back and saying, I bought this kit off you and it didn't work. or I bought the kit, it was reactive, then I went to the clinic and it was a false reactive. So we've got no way of standardising the way of recording that. But in the year's worth of experience, there have been 6 reported false reactives, and this is mostly coming as is kind of an ad hoc way, but maybe clinicians saying to the company, "Oh, we had this guy on one of the tests, and it was falsely reactive." So 6 reported false reactives. Knowing how the test performs in terms of its sensitivity and specificity, though, you would expect around 50 or more. So it's reassuring, but we don't know if that captures everybody, and almost certainly doesn't, who had a reactive test that was subsequently a negative when they went for confirmatory testing. And there are equally low levels of reported invalid results. So there was a problem with the device, the lancet didn't work, or the line didn't come up. So just 16, which is just 0.05%. I suspect that's probably closer to a real number, because if you paid 30 quid for a test and then something like one with it, you probably would get in touch with the company and say, "My test didn't work, please can I have another one?" In terms of the user feedback, as I said, there's kind of 3 ways of getting user feedback. This is a little out of date now. This is from data when we last looked at it back in April. But there's the website questionnaires, the unsolicited responses from people, and also the Pebble website. So of all of the people ordering the test, about 5% have provided some kind of feedback. And when people were asked about their experience was very well. The results are really good in terms of acceptability. So 98% would use it again, 98% said the test was easy to do, and 99% said the test was easy to read when they did it. Now this is some quotes taken from the Pebble feedback. So this is a website, so this is publicly available, so you can go and have a look at this. I think if you're interested in what some people's experiences are, it's an interesting thing to read through. Again, this is out of date now. This is back in April when there were 101 responses on there. And they're almost universally positive, and they also address what I think are some of those key barriers, like waiting for the results, feeling it was stressful, the nearest clinic was too far away, amazing, excellent, I appreciate the privacy, it's discreet, it's easy. So very positive. This is a self-selecting group, obviously it's a small proportion. I put that one in red, because I think there is, I'm not sure if it's changed, but certainly at this time there was only one comment that was negative, and that was somebody who'd had a false reactive result, who had spent a couple of days, maybe a bit longer, getting to the clinic, so he'd had an anxious wait to get the confirmatory test to confirm, to actually refute the false reactive and to confirm that he was HIV negative. So it's important to have that in there, I think, to remind ourselves that we need to make sure that we maximise the information with the kits and online about the importance of confirmatory testing, and that people are able to get that as quickly as possible, and also that they're able to get information and advice about what a reactive test means and how they can confirm it. So that's, I guess, the private experience, if you like, so the post-market experience of the BioSure kit. So what do we know about how HIV self-testing might work in a public sector way, so in the NHS or in community organisations where people can perhaps access it for free? So I'm going to talk about 2 things. One is part of this study called Pantheon, and then the other is this sort of recent pilot that we did at Karolinska Trust. So Pantheon is a large study. It's got sort of 3 work streams to it. It's part way through, and the main research questions that they're asking is: does provision of free HIV self-testing increase rates of diagnoses? This is being done in men homosexual men. And also, in a broader sense, which HIV prevention initiatives, either alone or in combination, are the most cost-effective. So it's looking at HIV self-testing, but also in the context of other prevention interventions, like condom use, behaviour change interventions, PrEP, treatment prevention. It's a big study with many collaborators and partners funded by the NIHR. And these are the 3 work streams. I've edited these down a little bit, but basically work stream 1, pretty much is done now, is about feasibility, so a literature review and the focus groups with men and sexual men. So this was set up when we had less experience of self-testing, and perhaps less of an idea about acceptability. Would people use it? How would they use it? How did they feel about it? So that's what I'm going to show you some data from. And then soon, early in the new year, we hope that there'll be the second bit, which is working through, which is a large randomised control trial of men of sex with men to look at the impact of HIV self-testing. So people will be randomised to get one self-test or to get multiple self-tests. So there'll be questionnaires and evaluation, which will also feed into the third work stream, which is looking at the cost effectiveness of all of those prevention strategies. So this is the work that Charlie's done. Charlie's there on our table with a check shirt. So if I get it wrong, he can shout me down. And if you'd like more detail, he knows the work inside out. And this is published online, so you can see this PLOS 1 online in September. So as I said, this was focus groups, and it was there were 6 focus groups altogether. In total, 47 HIV-negative men or sex with men, all aged over the age of 18, done in London, Manchester, and Plymouth. And those 3 sites mainly chosen because they've got different populations of men or sex with men, different HIV prevalences, different availability of other testing technologies, so to give a bit of a spread of people's experiences. And then there were a couple of more focused focus groups, one on higher risk men of sex with men, and one on men of sex with men who had never tested. And the reason for that being that they potentially are the group for whom HIV self-testing would have the greatest potential impact. People were recruited through online apps and through local community organisations. The mean age was 36. People were selected to try and give us representative, or perhaps even an over-representation of certain groups. So there were 1 in 5 were BME, 1 in 5 didn't identify as gay, 30% had used either self-sampling or self-testing before. And in the focus groups, they demonstrated both the BioSure kit and the Oral Quick test. So the Oral Quick is the oral self-test, which isn't available in the UK, but it has got quite a lot of experience in the States, so it's been around for years. So just this is very high level, and you can read the detail in Charlie's paper, but some of the key messages that came out from that was the context that these men of sex with men were in was where there was a really strong social norm for testing and regular testing. So it was accepted that testing was a good thing to do and people should be doing it. And they felt that the availability of HIV tests in any sense had increased in recent years. And self-testing was seen as a useful addition, and again this theme coming up particularly in rural areas where access to traditional services is less. And they felt that multiple models of care for HIV self-testing were required, as well as, this comes down to the tested features, the ideal being both a blood-based test and a salivary-based test. Blood-based tests were seen as better, as being perhaps more sciencey or more reliable, more trustworthy than the saliva test, but it was recognised that even with a finger prick and even with the small amounts of blood that you need on a BioSure self-test, if you're needle phobic, that's a complete barrier. You can't do that. There were comments around the amount of information that was in the kit as seen as being too complicated and too confusing, and that's, I think, a function of the regulatory process. So when you've got a self-test that's new to the market, the regulators, ultimately under the control of MHRA, probably overcompensate in terms of their expectation of the information that needs to go in that. BioSure have since got CE marking for a smaller, leaner, slimline kit, which has got much more edited down information. And that's the kit that we use in our pilot work. So some of those issues hopefully will have been addressed. Another thing which I guess could well impact on people's preference in terms of testing was that people expressed a strong preference for a very sensitive test, so the reliability of the result, and a shorter window period as possible, which I guess is useful because it means I'm messaging around window periods and retesting and 4th generation tests and 4-week window periods getting out. But the test kit, certainly in terms of well, actually both of the self-test is 12 weeks because it's an antibody test. It doesn't have the antigen in it. It doesn't detect HIV as early as a blood test that you send to the labs, and that I think is something that's important to address, both in terms of how acceptable. It's not that it's a bad test, that's just how it performs, and you just need to know that because then that informs your advice about window period and when to retest. But it is a potential thing to consider, and it'd be good to look at this in that Pantheon study, that if we're looking at this as an intervention for regular testing perhaps in high-risk melanocytic men, you can see how it could perhaps potentially be a nicely used in combination with someone who's on PrEP, who's having lots of risks, who perhaps doesn't want to come to the clinic every 4 weeks for their HIV tests. But that window period, it may well be an issue in groups who are taking greater risk, and we just need to be aware of that. So in terms of the self-testing acceptability was very high, and certainly people, so the strong themes that came out was about the confidentiality and was about the convenience, and it was recognised that it was a good opportunity to test and to test more often. An interesting theme that comes out through some of our evaluation of home sampling and self-sampling and self-testing is this sense that people would be less likely to test if they thought they were going to be positive. And there was definitely a strong sense that HIV testing in GUM clinics was still very valuable. So this was an addition; it was not a replacement. So there were themes around the benefits that people get from obviously testing for other sexually transmitted infections and that interaction that they get from healthcare professionals and health advisors about safe sex and so on. Interestingly, I guess we were too early in the days of availability of self-testing to see if this is true, but there was some sense that over-testing might be, people might just, maybe if you're a bit anxious, you might test too much if it was available for free. I don't think we haven't got to a position where we've got enough free self-testing to actually see whether that's true. And I think there are practical issues around the test, both in terms of their own ability to be able to do it, that some concerns were expressed, and also obviously the instant nature being off-putting for some people. And this has been one of the things that has been underpinning, I think, negativity around self-testing over the years and concerns around self-testing, which is about clearly that somebody out there getting a test without conventional support that they would get if they were having a face-to-face test. And then there were sort of concerns around perhaps increased risk-taking, and this kind of ties into the window period thing, that somebody may get a false sense of security from a negative test when actually they're seronegative and the test just hasn't been able to be there. So I don't think any of those things are reasons for us not to push forward. Obviously, because I'm standing here and I'm an advocate of self-testing, reasons to push forward with self-testing, but I definitely think there are things that will inform how we do it. The information that we provide with self-testing, the wraparound and integration that we use with community organisations, the NHS organisations, for that information, advice and support for people who are choosing to self-test. I also don't think that, this is also a way to think about when we're comparing data of people who haven't tested, although 30% of these have, but the people who choose to test. But I think, I think there will be an element of there will be self-selection. I think if you're concerned about doing the kit, if you're concerned that it might turn positive when you buy yourself at home, if you want some more information and advice, you're not going to go and get a self-test, and nor should you, because that's not the right thing for you. But there are, as you'll see, plenty of people who think self-testing is a good thing. So the last bit of data for you is some findings from a pilot that we've just run in partnership between Thames Acres Trust and BioSure. So this ran over the summer, just for a couple of months, and this was funded by the Thames Acres Trust Lighthouse Fund. So basically what we did is we had 5,000 kits, and these were the newer versions of the BioSure kits. So they're smaller, they go through the letterbox, which is obviously key to this pilot, and have less of the information has been edited down, is on the inside of the box, so it's less bits of paper that came from negativity from some of those focus groups. So 5,000 kits that could be ordered online, and in a similar way to pilots that we've done in the past with self-sampling, we targeted them specifically at melanocytic men and Black Africans. So there was, so we built a website for it. There were some screening questions, and if you didn't identify one of those groups, then you couldn't order a test from here, but you were signposted to clinic finders or to the National Self-Sampling Service if that was available in your area. So we gave other people the options of how to get a test. In similar ways as we've done before, and something that THC has certainly got a great deal of experience and success with, we promoted the service through Facebook and Twitter, so sort of more generic online things, and then also through the social media apps, specifically used by melanocytic men like Grindr and Stripe. Now, one of the I guess, concerns about self-testing is that in theory, you can just send out all of these tests and then you don't know what's happened to them. You don't know who's had a reactive, you don't know who's had a false reactive, you don't know if they did it, you don't know if their experience, what their experience was like. And I think that's been, in a sense, an anxiety when people have been thinking about, should we do this, should we commission this, should we use public funds for this, because you don't know what the output of that is. So in a slightly more supported self-testing way, we asked people to let us know their results. So we built a secure bit on the website where when they'd done the test, they could tell us what the result was. Anybody who told us they had a reactive result was called by me. I'm not suggesting that as a when we go big with this. But in this small part, that was acceptable. They got great level of care, they sort of call me up and say, how are you? But that was really just to ensure that, there was lots of information about how they get advice on the website in the box that directed to THT Direct, on the support services, clinic finders for going to get a complimentary test. So I gave everybody a call just to see how they were doing and to see if we could confirm whether or not they'd access to care. And so the research went from June until August. So 5,000 kits went out, and 62% of people told us what their result was. So we don't know what happened to 40% of them. None of them may have done the test, all of them may have done the test, but we don't know. Now, 62% for me is very favourably comparable to self-sampling return rates. It's perhaps not as good as some of the best self-sampling services, where you get up to 75%. We certainly get like that number, but 62% I would suggest is good. And we had 29, I'm confusing the terminology, I'm going to use correctly, 29 reactive results. Now, of those, 3 people already knew they were positive. Now, we've seen this in every new testing service that we do. Point of care, community, self-sampling, self-testing. Some people use this to sense check their own status, to access care. So that's not a bad thing, I thought that's a good thing. Now, I spoke to all of those 3. One of them was somebody who was just sort of mystery shopping it just to see what it was like. That's fair enough, and we get some very positive feedback about it. And the other 2 were people. One was a Black African woman who had some beliefs about the fact that her HIV might go. So I was able to give her talk to her about that and encourage her to go and speak to her HIV clinician about that. And the other one was an NSM who had similar beliefs and also had some issues around starting treatment. So they were all in care, so that they weren't people who were lost to follow-up, but they were all of their, I guess, information and advice needs weren't being fully met, so I could do that briefly over the phone and post that. We had 1 confirmed false positive, so we had a reactive result, went to clinic and had a negative blood test. So 25 new HIV diagnoses. Now, of all of those, I was able to call them probably between maybe 2 and 4 days after they told us of the results. Now, that wasn't 2 or 4 days after they'd done the results. So a lot of them did the results and then got around to telling us about it later. So probably a few days after the result. And actually, all of the people that I've spoken to had either already been to GU or were planning to go to GU. So would have accessed care even if I hadn't called up to check they were going to do that. So I've got a few slides with a lot of data on it, but essentially, almost all of the users were men who have sex with men. Now, that's a function of the fact that the promotion, particularly through social media, is easier to men who have sex with men, particularly through things like Grindr. And it's a similar kind of finding to what we found with home sampling before self-sampling, whereas the Black African community is a harder group to reach. I don't believe that self-sampling or self-testing doesn't work for Black Africans. It's just harder sometimes to get to our pathways in terms of promoting it, much easier for men who have sex with men. So the vast majority were men who have sex with men, and a really small proportion of women, and a smaller proportion of those of trans men and trans women. The mean age was 31, and the vast majority were white British. Just 3.3% identified as Black African. Now we did this is a relatively short, dirty pilot, and we didn't probably spend as much time. We've been able in the past with self-sampling to get those like African uptake rates up, but with quite a lot of intervention. We didn't have the time or the money to do that one, so we really needed more of those numbers on that. 90% of the kits, actually, interestingly, the flip side of the BioShield data were from urban settings. This might have something to do with how the promotion was focused. I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that. But there was certainly a wide geographical spread of where the tests were being ordered from. Those are the top 5 or 6 places where kits were ordered from. We've got a nice graph somewhere where there's one from Northern Ireland and there's one from Guernsey. So they did get around, although they were focused in more urban settings. This is the little graph showing when people told us about their results. And the first peak is sort of quite soon after they received the result. So a smallish proportion of people got the test, did the test, told us about the test. And then those other 2 peaks were reminders. So we sent people reminders at 7 days post-order and 10 days post-order. So I think what that shows is you get a good you get a good response in terms of people telling you their result with that 7-day reminder, less so with the 10-day reminder. To go through the ordering process, we used some similar risk assessment questions that we've used on self-sampling before to get an idea of what kind of people are testing in terms of their background risk behaviour. And I think, for me, reassuring is probably not the right word, but we certainly targeted a group of men who have men who are high risk for HIV in this pilot. So 80% of them had 2 or more partners in the last year. A fifth had reported 6 or 12 in the last year, and 14% reported 13 or more. The majority of people, so nearly 70%, had condoms anal sex in the last 3 months, and nearly a third had reported that with more than 2 partners. Nearly half of them reported sometimes having sex under the influence of drinking or drugs, and 14% said that occurred most of the time or always. So we managed to get to a high risk group, and 20% of them have never had an HIV test. So this is a group of people, the majority of whom should be testing more frequently than once a year, certainly, probably as much as 3 or 4 times a year. And if we remember some of the PHE guidance in its broadest sense, then such as should be having an HIV test every year, and about 40% have not. So I think it's a high-risk group who are not testing the frequencies that we'd like to see. In terms of some qualitative experience, we sent everybody a SurveyMonkey survey. We got 600 responses from that, which reflected the fact that this was a group of sort of 25 to 30-year-olds, so mid-20s to mid-30s, white, gay men, or men of sex as men. The majority of the people who, but a high proportion of the people who responded to the survey had already told us their results, and that probably just reflects the fact that people who responded to the survey were still more engaged in the process than people who chose not to and chose not to give us their results. When we asked people, and these don't add up to 100 because you could have multiple responses, but we asked people why they used the service, and again it reinforces a lot of the things that we've had from the survey before. So the top thing was about wanting an immediate result. So this obviously was people for whom self-testing was acceptable, having confidence in the organisation as an HIV testing provider, and then those common themes about inconvenience of getting to a clinic, or the clinic times being inconvenient, and not wanting, for whatever reason, to go to a testing site in person. Again, this is from the survey. 15% had never tested before, and when they had tested, 70% had been to a traditional clinic. 28% had previously used a home sampling kit. It's nice to see those figures starting to go up. Home sampling becoming more of a means for people to test. Just short of 10% paid for a self-testing kit. Very high levels of acceptability. So 98% would use the service again. 99% said the process was easy, the website was clear, the ordering process was clear, the information and the instructions and the advice that came with it were good. 97% said they would recommend the service to a friend, and they expected to test negative. And we did this in our previous self-sampling evaluation. So ask that question about would you recommend it to somebody who thought was going to be positive, or would you recommend it to somebody who thought was going to be negative? And that reinforces the stuff that comes out of Charlie's work, where there's that sense of I'm not sure if I'd do it or recommend it if I thought it was going to be positive. So a drop off there between if you ask them about if they recommend it to them or positive. We're starting to probe, I guess, financial sustainability models. Is this something that we can do on scale within the increasingly shrinking amounts of money that are available in the statutory sector for NHS and third sector organisations? So we start to explore what people would people be willing to pay and what they'd be willing to pay. So the 60% said they'd be happy to pay for the service. Just over 50% would pay a fiver, 48% said they'd pay a tenner. When it starts to drop off and get up to 15 or 20 quid. Which I think is interesting because you can deliver this for around about tenner. So it's beginning to I guess challenge our notion that everything has to be done for free. Some people can and will pay for things, and perhaps that's the kind of mixed model we need to be exploring if we want to get to the scale of testing that we need. So just to pull that all together, so self-testing is certainly proving very popular in the private setting. I mean, considering that a kit is 30 quid, I think shifting 35,000 is impressive. And I think what we're starting to see, it's a small pilot, 5,000 people, that self-testing for the right kind of people is certainly feasible and acceptable in a sort of public or NHS or statutory setting. As in other people's experience and our previous experience, it is very easy, I think, to access high-risk men or sex with men. It is much harder to access other at-risk groups, and we need to keep working on ways to work out how to do that, so particularly Black Africans and trans populations, I would say. As we've seen in all of our experience before, ordering is very closely linked to social media promotion, media and the news in general, and health promotion messaging. Certainly in the post-marketing surveillance, we've seen much lower levels of reported kit failure or false positive results, and user feedback is extremely positive whether people have paid for the test or not. The Bioshore data, I guess, is our biggest sort of data to date, and that's why I think that the study campaign is going to be really important. But that data, as I said, only gives us a limited picture. It requires all self-reporting, so we don't know what's going on for everyone. And I think it would be great to start to see us working more closely with PHE, with Government to try and integrate our data collection with statutory returns when people come for a test. I mean, there are codes for self-sampling and self-testing on GovCAD, but we can identify that and have perhaps a more robust way of seeing how many people are testing this way, how many are getting, what the access to care levels are, and what are the real life false reactive rates. Now, we kind of designed the THC Bioshore pilot to start to answer some of these questions, but I think we've still got some more experiential stuff to get. We're going to be doing this on scale, nationally, in terms of answering some of those questions there. How will we perform if it's free? How best can we target those who are most at risk? What is the real experience of getting a reactive result? How can we robustly ensure that people access care? And what are the impacts on broader testing rates and